It's time for my favorite segment of this show, Money, Power, Politics. And in case you missed it, the president declared victory over the affordability crisis. Now, that might be news to the more than 60% of Americans who are very concerned about the price of health care, housing, and food. And normally, we spend a lot of time in this segment looking at all the ways Trump's policies are impacting your finances. But I want to take a moment to look at things Trump has promised to do about affordability that aren't hitting your wallet, like $5,000 DOGE dividend checks, or $2,000 tariff dividend checks, or $1,000 savings checks from expiring health care subsidies. There's a pattern here. Catch on. You remember those? Okay, folks, those checks never arrived. But we know what has arrived. There's been higher health care costs, more tariffs, and a whole lot of uncertainty. David Gura joins me now. He is a correspondent from Bloomberg and the host of the podcast, The Big Take. And John Harwood, a veteran Washington correspondent, distinguished fellow at Duke University, and columnist for Zetea on Substack. David, I mean, there's a long, really just a growing list of unfulfilled promises. And I'm a former strategist, and I can tell you that is not what you want right before midterm elections. Do you think the stimulus checks were ever really in the cards?
I think that, as you pointed out, he's grasped that over and over again, and there's a whole economic argument against it that would fuel inflation if he were to do it. But it seems like the one mechanism he keeps reaching for, yet he's not deploying it at the end. Look, he has promised to lower prices. That was the fundamental promise of his campaign. And there was a moment a couple months back at the Federal Reserve's press conference when Jay Powell, the Fed chair, said, if you were to strip away the tariffs that were in place, inflation would be back around that 2% target that the Fed has. So it's the tariffs that have caused inflation to be where it is, higher than the Fed wants it to be. This is a persistent problem, a nagging problem for this president. You mentioned the uncertainty. That's another thing that's just added additional fuel to the fire here. Americans are rightly concerned about how much groceries cost, if they're able to get houses or buy cars. All the while, we have a president who's talking about vegetarianism in Greenland, talking about the prospects of there being war in the Middle East. These are things that are far afield from what most Americans are worried about right now, and that's really the crux of the fundamental issue here for Americans today.
There's a disconnect, it feels like. And, you know, John, the president did run on fixing the economy and easing Americans' affordability concerns. But as we've just laid out, that hasn't happened yet. He promised these checks, and it made me think back to during COVID, the stimmies, as the young people call them, the stimulus checks that went out. The president signed his name to them, and there are many people to this day that say, I remember when Trump gave us the check during COVID and it was very helpful. Now, Congress was actually the ones that gave out the check, but the president very smartly, I would argue, put his name on them. Voters are, though, still struggling to put food on the table. The checks have not come. Do you think he's disconnected? Do you think he's out of touch?
He's totally disconnected. It makes absolutely no sense for him to declare victory on the economy. First of all, just level set for a minute. He inherited a very good economy from Joe Biden. He said it was terrible. It was not terrible. It was good. He has not made it better. As David said, he promised to lower prices. He hasn't done that. Inflation was trending down, and it trended down in the first couple of months of his presidency. Liberation Day happened, and it spiked back up. So inflation will end 2025 slightly lower than it was in 2024, but not as low as it would have been if he hadn't put the tariffs on. That has injected uncertainty into the economy. The job market has dramatically cooled down. It's not as easy to get a job as it was before. It's not a terrible economy. We're growing. We're not in recession. Unemployment remains relatively low. But the point is, it wasn't bad when he got it, and it's not better after a year of his presidency, and that is not the story that he told.
Well, people are not feeling it in their wallets at the grocery store. I mean, beef is up about 15% right now. David, Philip Bump has a piece for MS Now, and this is what he wrote. That elderly Americans are the ones propping up this economy. There's growing demand for health care aides and nursing home and retirement care, but basically everywhere else, hiring is stalled. So what is happening here? Because healthcare is key, and I mean, it is expensive, not to mention the fact that there are so many people right now that, because of the changes last year, they can't afford their healthcare. There are many people that are going without.
As you know, few people are better with charts than Philip Bump, and it's a great piece because he looks at the decline that we've seen in public sector jobs as a result of the president and DOGE cutting all of the federal jobs that we've seen him cut over the last couple of years. he talks a lot about there being a renaissance in manufacturing this country. That has not come to pass. And so when he drills into the data there so well, he sees that there has been this growth among healthcare workers, home health aides, and it tells this story of demographics in this country, that's where the growth is. That's important. I don't mean to diminish that people need that kind of help as they get older, but really what he has promised, and we've talked about the promise of lowering prices, another promise here is kind of wider gains in the job market. And what you see there in stark relief is that's not happening. We're not seeing a whole lot of growth, certainly not in the public sector, but in other parts of the private sector. It really is confined to this one space here of healthcare and home health workers and to an extent some education jobs as well.
And Simone, there are two ways in which this underscores, what Philip wrote about underscores the ways in which Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda is unwise, not just on a moral basis, but on an economic basis. Where do those home health workers come from? Many, many of them are immigrants. And we need that labor force to take care of the growing number of boomers who are retiring. The second thing is all those boomers who are retiring are getting Social Security and Medicare. How do we finance those programs? We need taxpayers to finance those programs. The generations behind us, me, the baby boomers, are not numerous enough to continue funding those benefits. We need those immigrant workers, and the president seems to be acting on the basis of a belief that if the country becomes less white, it's a less satisfactory country. But economically, that is not at all the case.
David, I mean, I just don't understand. The numbers are very clear here, right? Sometimes, when you work at the White House, you kind of get mired up in the data from the NEC and the meetings and whatnot. But literally, if you just go outside and talk to any regular person, even people that seem to be doing very well in this country, they will tell you they feel squeezed and they are struggling. So I am actually struggling to understand how they could be so disconnected from what is going on.
You were hitting at the heart of the matter, and that is consumer sentiment. The way that people feel about this economy isn't good, and that's got to flummox people who are in the jobs that you had previously, those who are in the White House. They can talk a good game about how things are going. You can have Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, lash out at Congress people saying, the Dow is at 50,000, the S&P's at whatever number it's at. That doesn't ring true to a lot of people because so many people in this country aren't invested in the stock market. That is not simply what they're caring about at this moment in time because it is not their lived experience. So you're highlighting what's very true, which is there's this real disconnect between what's happening in the stock market, what's happening in the economy, and the way that the White House is managing that, and the way that the president's managing. We know well he's been reluctant to engage with this issue of affordability. He's going to go down to Georgia this week and continue this kind of small tour that he's been on of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and other states. But again, it's not a term that he's eager to embrace because simply put, the numbers, the data don't seem to match up with what he's saying on the campaign trail.
And Simone, the president's narcissism prevents him from being connected with ordinary Americans. They're not happy with the state of the economy. They're not happy with him. But he has this sense of grandiosity about himself that he is producing the greatest economy in the world, that he's the greatest president in the world. He wants to slap his name on everything. That is a function of his mental state, and it completely cuts him off from ordinary Americans.